It started with the sound of breaking glass. A quiet Windsor morning torn apart by chaos. Windows shattered, doors forced open, and a wave of blue lights cutting through the mist. Locals didn't know what was happening, only that something big, something forbidden, was being uncovered inside the home of a man whose name had already been whispered in scandal for years. That man was Prince Andrew. But this time, it wasn't about interviews or rumors. It wasn't about the headlines or the royal family's PR machine spinning out of control. This was different. This time, there was evidence, and it was hidden deep inside his private residence. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if I told you investigators discovered something that could destroy not just a man's reputation, but the image of an entire institution? What if I told you it wasn't money, or drugs, or jewelry, but something far more disturbing? A hidden room, a series of surveillance tapes, and a dark connection stretching back over 2 decades. Some of those tapes, they say, feature him alongside a man the world now associates with the darkest form of exploitation, Jeffrey Epstein. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This isn't gossip. It's a story that begins with a forced door and ends with the kind of revelation that makes even the most loyal royal defenders go silent. Because once those tapes came to light, the walls of Buckingham itself began to tremble. The morning had begun quietly. Security cameras showed nothing unusual, just the soft hum of servants preparing breakfast and gardeners clipping hedges outside. Then, a convoy of unmarked black vehicles pulled up to the gate. Men in plain clothes stepped out, badges ready, their faces set in grim focus. The order was clear: enter, secure, search. At first, no one inside understood why. The Duke's household staff froze as the men advanced. For a moment, it was like a scene from a film, the kind where the past finally catches up with the powerful. They went room by room, methodically, until they reached a wing of the house that hadn't been entered in years. Dust hung thick in the air, furniture covered in white sheets. A forgotten hallway that led nowhere, or so everyone thought. And that's when they found it. A locked wooden door, reinforced from the inside. There was no key, no record of it ever being built. But the officers knew what they were looking for. The lock was broken open, the hinges groaned, and the door swung wide. Inside was darkness. The kind of still, heavy darkness that feels alive, like it's holding its breath. When the flashlights flickered on, the men stopped talking. There were shelves, boxes stacked neatly against the wall, a faint smell of dust, paper, and something metallic. And there, half hidden beneath a faded blanket, a collection of small, black VHS tapes. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Home recordings, maybe. Family videos, forgotten security footage. But when one of the investigators brushed off the dust, he noticed something written along the edge in shaky handwriting. Guest Wing, 2003. That's when everything changed. The lead officer reportedly froze. The label was familiar, the year, the location, the context. All of it aligned with a period of time the royal household has tried for years to erase. The kind of year when certain friendships were still alive. The kind of year when certain guests, ones the palace now denies ever being there, walked freely through its halls. You could almost feel the air tighten. The cameras clicked. Boxes were opened. More tapes, more dates. 2001, 2004, 2006, all marked in the same handwriting. Some bore strange initials. Others just said study, guest room, or yacht. None of it made sense, not yet. But what they represented was undeniable. Someone, somewhere, had been recording. The question was, who? Because hidden surveillance cameras inside a royal residence, that's not something you stumble upon by accident. That's a system, a network, a deliberate act of observation. Was Andrew being spied on? Or was he the one behind it? The team quickly secured the evidence, placing each tape into sealed containers. The operation was quiet. No leaks, no press alerts, no official statements. But rumors travel fast in royal circles, and by the afternoon, whispers had reached London. Something had been found at Royal Lodge, and it wasn't jewelry or documents. It was worse, much worse. For years, Andrew's name has been linked, again and again, to Epstein's dark empire. He's denied everything, sworn he had no knowledge of the financier's crimes. But if these tapes exist, and if they show what insiders claim, that denial could crumble overnight. Think about this. Surveillance tapes, hidden for 2 decades, stored in a private royal residence. Not Buckingham Palace. Not a government archive. A private home. That alone raises terrifying questions. Who installed the cameras? Who kept the tapes safe all these years? And what was their true purpose? Was someone blackmailing the prince? Or was someone else using his house as part of something larger? Something involving power, leverage, and control? You might think this sounds too extreme to be real. But history has a strange way of repeating itself, especially when it comes to secrets hidden behind palace walls. The royal family has weathered scandals before, affairs, divorces, leaked phone calls. But never anything like this. Never something that could reach into the heart of global corruption and drag a royal name back into the shadows of Jeffrey Epstein's network. As news of the discovery began to spread, reporters camped outside Royal Lodge, desperate for confirmation. The palace gave none. But the silence spoke volumes. One insider described the atmosphere as pure panic. Staff were questioned, archives reviewed, even blueprints rechecked. No one could explain the hidden room, or how it had remained untouched for so long. And yet, behind the scenes, a quiet war was already beginning. Lawyers, advisors, crisis managers, all trying to keep the lid on what might be the biggest royal scandal since the abdication crisis. Because once you bring cameras into the story, once you introduce recorded evidence, the game changes. The monarchy thrives on image, on control. But what happens when control is lost? When footage exists that contradicts every official statement? When history itself has been filmed from the shadows? One royal historian put it bluntly: if these tapes are authentic, this is not just about Andrew anymore. This is about the institution that protected him. Let that sink in. Because this story isn't just about a man. It's about what happens when privilege meets accountability and loses. By evening, investigators had left the property. Trucks carried sealed evidence containers into the fog, disappearing into official custody. The press tried to chase them, but access was blocked. Only one anonymous officer, later interviewed off record, gave a haunting description: "You don't want to know what's on them. Once you see it, you can't unsee it." That line alone fueled an international frenzy. Social media exploded with speculation. Some claimed the tapes contained footage from Epstein's visits to royal estates. Others said they were blackmail material, filmed secretly to trap the elite. And some, the ones closest to the investigation, said the truth was even darker, that the tapes weren't filmed by Epstein, but for him. It's a horrifying possibility that somewhere inside the royal household, there were individuals working to supply him with footage. Footage that could guarantee loyalty, silence, and fear. And if that's true, then what does that say about how deep this network really went? Think about it. 20 years of recordings, hundreds of hours of footage, dozens of faces, names, dates, all of it buried, forgotten, waiting to resurface when the world least expected it. And when it finally did, the consequences were unstoppable. What makes this even more chilling is the timing. The discovery comes just as Andrew was reportedly trying to rebuild his image, attending private events, reappearing in family photos, attempting quiet reintegration. It's as if the past refused to let him escape, like the walls themselves were keeping score. In royal history, reputation is everything. But reputation built on secrecy is a fragile thing. One broken door, one found tape, and decades of denial collapse overnight. But let's ask the question no one in the palace wants to. What if this isn't the first time something like this has happened? What if Epstein's reach into royal circles wasn't just personal, but systematic? Because hidden surveillance was his signature move. From Manhattan to the Virgin Islands, every one of his properties was wired. Bedrooms, hallways, massage rooms, everything recorded. So, when investigators find similar equipment embedded in a royal residence, what conclusion can you possibly draw? Coincidence? Or connection? This story forces us to face something uncomfortable. That maybe, just maybe, the lines between the powerful and the corrupt aren't as separate as we'd like to believe. That the same walls that kept the royal family safe also hid something monstrous. And as you'll see in the chapters ahead, this wasn't just about a few tapes. This was an entire hidden network, one that may have extended far beyond the gates of Windsor. In the coming days, more will be uncovered: strange labels, coded markings, and connections that trace all the way to Epstein's private island. The discovery will set off a chain reaction inside Buckingham that even the king himself won't be able to contain. But before we get there, we need to go back to where it all began, to the moment those doors were broken open, and to the room that was never meant to be found. Because what they saw inside that hidden chamber was only the beginning. It began quietly, almost too quietly. A fog had rolled over Windsor that morning, thick and slow, like the world itself was holding its breath. The dew hadn't yet lifted from the lawns when a convoy of black SUVs appeared at the gates of Royal Lodge, tires crunching on gravel. They didn't arrive with the roaring drama of sirens. No, this was the kind of operation that didn't need noise to be terrifying, the kind that whispered power. Inside, the staff had no warning. The kitchen was alive with the clatter of breakfast prep, the faint hum of the radio, a normal start to the day. Then came the knock, hard, deliberate, echoing down the marble hall. One knock, then another. By the third, the butler knew something was wrong. He'd worked there for decades, had seen journalists camp outside the gates, protesters, even angry locals, but never this. When he opened the door, the sight before him froze his blood. 6 men in dark suits. No smiles, no hesitation. They showed badges, official, urgent, the kind that demanded obedience. Behind them, a locksmith carried a heavy steel case. "We have authorization to enter the premises," one of the men said flatly. The butler stammered. Authorization from whom? The man didn't answer. He only handed him a sealed letter with a red crest. Within minutes, the atmosphere inside the mansion changed. The staff whispered. Footsteps echoed on marble floors as the men spread out, moving with military precision. The order was simple: search. Every room, every corner, every hidden space. The first locks came off easily. The officers moved quickly, flipping light switches, peering into storage rooms. They took photos, noted serial numbers. But the more they searched, the more it became clear. They weren't just looking for paperwork or valuables. They were looking for something specific. One of the agents, a tall man with gray hair, seemed to know exactly where he was going. He led them through the east corridor, past portraits of forgotten dukes, and stopped before a narrow door half hidden behind a tapestry. The hinges were rusted. The handle didn't turn. "This one," he said quietly. The locksmith opened his case, pulling out tools that gleamed even in the dim light. The sound of metal on metal filled the hall. Each twist of the wrench echoed like thunder in the silence. Then came the snap. The lock gave way. The door shuddered and creaked open. What they saw inside made everyone step back. It wasn't a storage room. It wasn't a study. It was different. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Dust danced in the flashlight beams. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books or antiques, but with boxes, neatly stacked, unlabeled, except for small strips of tape bearing handwritten numbers. "Cataloged," one officer muttered. "Like an archive." But it wasn't just the boxes. At the far end of the room stood a wooden cabinet, locked tight. The officer tried the handle. It wouldn't move. The locksmith stepped forward again, tools clinking softly. Within minutes, the cabinet door opened. And that's when they saw them. Tapes. Dozens of them. Small, black, and dusty. VHS. Some stacked vertically, others scattered like someone had been in a hurry decades ago and never returned. And on the side of one, faded but still legible, were the words, "Guest Wing, 2003. The room went silent. You could feel the tension thickening like a storm. One of the officers lifted the tape gingerly, holding it up to the light. "What the hell is this doing here?" another asked. The gray-haired man didn't answer. He only said, "Bag it. Every single one." And then, quietly, almost to himself, he whispered, "We found it." Outside, the wind picked up. The flag on the roof flapped violently, as if the estate itself was protesting. The search intensified. More compartments were found. Hidden panels, false walls, even a trapdoor beneath the old study rug. Each time, the same thing. Tapes. Labeled by year. 2001, 2002, 2004, some marked with strange initials, J among them. The realization hit slowly, like poison spreading through the bloodstream. Whoever had recorded these tapes had done it meticulously, intentionally. This wasn't a collection of random footage. It was surveillance. Long-term, organized, and deliberate. The head officer radioed in, his voice low and steady. "We're going to need additional units. Secure the perimeter. This is bigger than expected." Within half an hour, more vehicles arrived. What was once a quiet estate had turned into a full-scale operation. Boxes sealed and evidence bags were carried out under black tarps. Reporters began to gather at the gates, sensing something monumental. But no one spoke. Not yet. Inside, one officer decided to test a tape. He found an old player in the corner, dusty but functional. He connected it to a small monitor from the equipment case. The screen flickered, static at first, then shapes began to form. At first, it seemed ordinary, a lavish room, dimly lit, voices laughing faintly in the distance. The camera angle was high, almost hidden. Then, slowly, two figures entered the frame. One of them, unmistakably familiar. A cold chill swept through the room. "Turn it off," the senior officer said. But the younger one hesitated. "Sir, that's..." "I said turn it off." He obeyed. The screen went black. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, the officer in charge took a deep breath. "Seal everything. Nothing leaves this property until I say so." Downstairs, the butler sat trembling, clutching a cup of tea he couldn't drink. Through the windows, he watched the convoy of evidence boxes disappear into the fog. He knew this house held secrets, but not like this. Not cameras, not recordings. He thought of all the nights he'd walked those halls, unaware he was being watched. And he wondered, watched by whom? Because here's the thing. Prince Andrew wasn't supposed to be home that morning. He was away, reportedly visiting friends in London. Yet somehow, investigators had chosen that exact moment to move in, almost as if someone had known precisely when to strike. Someone on the inside. And whoever that was, they'd set in motion a discovery that would send shockwaves through the palace. By afternoon, rumors began to ripple through the royal networks. Phones buzzed. Advisors scrambled. Aides whispered words like containment and damage control. Buckingham's corridors buzzed with quiet panic. "Tell me it isn't true," one aide reportedly muttered, pacing in the communications room. "Please tell me it's not him again." But it was. When word reached the king's inner circle, sources say Charles went pale. There were meetings, urgent calls, orders to keep it internal. But by then, it was too late. Someone had already leaked the basics to a reporter, a trusted royal correspondent who'd been waiting for years for the next scandal. And when the first article appeared online, titled simply "Police Raid Royal Lodge," confidential materials seized, the floodgates opened. Every outlet wanted answers. Every headline screamed suspicion. The words "hidden tapes" and "Epstein" appeared in the same sentence for the first time in years. But none of the journalists knew just how deep this discovery went, or how old it really was. See, those tapes weren't fresh. They weren't digital. They belonged to another era, back when cameras were bulkier and secrets harder to erase. Whoever made them didn't rely on cloud servers or USB drives. They trusted physical copies, something tangible, something that could be hidden, locked away. And that's exactly what Andrew, or someone close to him, had done. For 2 decades. Here's the chilling part. As the officers packed up the last of the boxes, one of them found a note tucked inside the cabinet. Just a small, yellowed envelope with one line written on it. For leverage, not memory. No signature. No context. But those 5 words changed everything. Leverage. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't a record. It was insurance. Now imagine this. For 20 years, inside a royal estate, tapes containing unknown footage had been hidden, deliberately labeled, cataloged, preserved. And among them, possibly, evidence connecting Andrew to Epstein's dark circle. The implications were massive. Not just for Andrew, but for anyone who'd been to that house, stayed there, or worked behind those walls. And here's where things get stranger. When analysts began reviewing the inventory list later, they found more than just tapes. There were digital drives, sealed photos, and small notebooks filled with cryptic entries, names, dates, places. It was a map of power, hidden in plain sight. But for now, the public didn't know any of that. All they knew was that the Duke of York's home had been breached and confidential items were seized. And while the palace worked overtime to downplay it, the truth was already unraveling behind the scenes. The officer in charge left the estate just before dusk. As he closed the case files in the back of his vehicle, a reporter shouted from behind the barricades, "Is it true, sir? Did you find the tapes?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her for a moment and said, "You'll see soon enough." That night, Royal Lodge stood silent again. The staff dismissed early. The estate dark, the windows reflecting nothing but fog. But inside, beneath the floorboards, beneath the centuries of royal history, the ghost of that discovery lingered. Somewhere in those hundreds of boxes lay images and voices that could end careers, shatter alliances, and possibly, if released, alter the course of the monarchy itself. The locks were broken. The secrets were out. And yet, this was only the beginning. Because as the investigators soon discovered, the hidden chamber was not the only one. There was another room, another cache, another layer of deception waiting to be peeled back. And what they'd find next would change everything. The hidden door was just the beginning. Once it swung open, the light from flashlights carved jagged shadows across the walls, illuminating rows of shelves that hadn't seen human hands in decades. Dust hung thick in the air, moving in slow, lazy patterns, disturbed only by the occasional beam of a flashlight. The officers stepped carefully, mindful that the floorboards, worn by years of neglect, could betray their presence. The room itself was small but perfectly constructed to hide its contents. It was rectangular, with reinforced walls that seemed designed not just for secrecy, but for security. Every inch was meticulously planned. Shelves built into niches, panels that blended into the woodwork, and an almost imperceptible groove running along the ceiling that hinted at concealed wiring. This wasn't a casual storage space. Whoever created it had invested time, money, and expertise. Boxes were stacked in precise order, some labeled in fading ink, 2001, 2003, J, guest wing. Others bore only cryptic codes, lines of letters and numbers that made no sense on first glance. The investigators paused, taking photographs and logging every item. It was methodical work, but the weight of what they were uncovering pressed down on them like a physical force. Then came the cabinet, a large, wooden piece that seemed almost ordinary compared to the surrounding shelves, but something about it drew attention. It was locked tight, the brass handle cold and worn, and no key was in sight. The locksmith set to work. The room was silent except for the sound of tools moving against metal. With a sharp click, the cabinet door swung open, revealing stacks of VHS tapes neatly aligned like soldiers on parade. The first tape pulled out was labeled Guest Wing 2003. The handwriting was familiar to one officer, and a ripple of unease passed through the team. This wasn't just old footage. This was carefully curated surveillance, preserved over 20 years. Whoever had made these recordings had planned for them to be found, or perhaps for them to remain hidden until the right moment. The tapes were small, unremarkable at first glance, but the implications were enormous. VHS technology had been largely phased out long before, yet here they were, preserved and cataloged. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure these tapes survived, stored in a climate-controlled environment within a hidden room inside a royal estate. As the officers began to examine the tapes, they noticed something unsettling. The labeling wasn't consistent. Some tapes had dates, others initials, and a few had strange, cryptic titles like Island 2006 or Meeting, Confidential. One tape even had a small hand-drawn symbol next to the date, almost like a signature. It was as if the person who created this archive was leaving a message for someone, or perhaps a warning. The room itself offered few clues about who had installed the surveillance. There were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry. The wiring for the cameras was hidden, running through the walls and ceiling in a way that suggested professional installation. This wasn't an amateur operation. It was sophisticated, deliberate, and calculated. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier as the team continued to explore. They found notebooks tucked behind shelves, filled with cryptic notes and diagrams. Names, dates, and locations were scribbled in a mix of cursive and block letters, some crossing over each other as if the writer had been in a hurry or anxious. There were references to parties, private visits, and gatherings that had never been publicly acknowledged. Some names were familiar, others obscure, but all seemed connected to the tapes. One officer picked up a notebook, flipping through pages filled with calculations and shorthand. "This isn't just surveillance," he muttered. "This is a record of events, meetings, connections. Whoever did this was tracking people, places, interactions. It's a map of influence. The realization sank in slowly, like a cold wave washing over the team. This room wasn't just storing old videos. It was storing evidence. Evidence of relationships, meetings, and encounters that had been deliberately hidden from the public eye. And among them, some names were impossible to ignore. Jeffrey Epstein. The mention of that name changed the tone of the operation. The officers stiffened, and the room seemed to grow colder. There were tapes marked with his initials, J, some labeled with specific years when his presence had been reported in media circles. The possibility that these recordings connected a member of the royal family to Epstein's private world was a notion heavy with implications. Questions began to flood the room. Who had installed the cameras? Why were they preserved for so long? And most unsettling of all, who else might have known about them? The officers continued their meticulous work, carefully documenting every tape and notebook. Some tapes appeared to have been copied, with labels indicating multiple versions. It was as if someone had been preparing for the possibility that these recordings might one day leave the house or be discovered. One of the senior investigators paused in front of a shelf, running his hand along the edge of a box labeled Island, 2006. He pulled it down and inspected the tape. The label was crude, handwritten in black marker, yet the significance was clear. 2006 was a year closely associated with certain infamous trips to private islands linked to Epstein. The implications were chilling. "You realize what this could mean?" he asked quietly, not wanting anyone else to hear. The answer hung in the air. If these tapes were authentic, they could provide evidence of interactions that had been denied for years. They could confirm visits, meetings, and connections that had long been the subject of speculation. And the thought that such evidence had been hidden, preserved within the private estate, sent a shiver down everyone's spine. As the investigation continued, more compartments were discovered. Hidden drawers in desks, panels behind bookcases, even false bottoms in storage boxes. Each revealed more tapes, notebooks, and documents, each item carefully labeled and cataloged. It became clear that the hidden room was not a single archive, but a network of concealed storage spaces, all designed to protect sensitive information from prying eyes. The officers worked methodically, but the weight of what they were uncovering was almost too much to bear. Each tape, each notebook, each cryptic note was a piece of a puzzle that could reshape the narrative around one of the most scrutinized figures in modern history. And as the day wore on, the team began to realize that this operation was only the beginning. By late afternoon, the last of the obvious items had been cataloged and secured. The hidden room, once an innocuous part of the estate, had been transformed into a site of monumental discovery. The significance of the materials could not be overstated. These were not casual recordings. They were carefully constructed, preserved, and hidden. And among them were tapes that could provide insight into decades of relationships, decisions, and events that had been shrouded in secrecy. As the officers prepared to leave the room, one of them paused and looked back. The shadows seemed to move, the air thick with a presence that was more than physical. The weight of history pressed down on them. And in that moment, a chilling thought struck everyone in the room. If these tapes had been preserved for 20 years, what else had been hidden? What other rooms, other caches, other secrets might still exist within the estate? Because the discovery of the hidden room was only the start. And what lay beyond it? The tapes, the notebooks, the evidence of a network of surveillance, would prove to be far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. And as night fell over Windsor, the estate stood silent once more, hiding its secrets behind locked doors, dust, and shadows. But the first pieces of a story that could shake the monarchy to its core had already been uncovered. The hidden room had spoken, and what it revealed was only the beginning. Because what the investigators would find next, the first tape, the first images, the first undeniable proof of connections that had been denied for decades, would change everything. And no one could have been prepared for what they were about to see. The tapes were small, unassuming, and unremarkable at first glance. Just black plastic rectangles with faded labels, stacked neatly in the cabinet, covered in decades of dust. If you held one in your hand without context, you might think it was a home video of a birthday party or a family gathering. But the moment the investigators read the labels, a cold sense of dread settled in. Guest Wing, 2003. Island, 2006. J, confidential. These were not casual recordings. These were surveillance. Carefully planned. Carefully preserved. For over 20 years, someone had collected these tapes and stored them in secret. Not in an archive. Not in a public facility. But inside a royal residence. The realization hit the team like a physical blow. Whoever made these recordings had invested time, money, and discretion. This was no random act. This was deliberate, methodical, and chillingly precise. As the officers continued sorting, they discovered more than just labels. Each tape seemed to contain a date, a location, and sometimes a code, initials, a symbol, or a cryptic note. There were names scribbled faintly on the edges of some tapes. At first, they didn't seem significant. But then one name emerged again and again, Jeffrey Epstein. The room grew colder, the air heavier. One investigator whispered under his breath, "If these are what we think they are, we are holding 2 decades of evidence." A younger officer, unable to restrain his curiosity, carefully slid one tape into an old VCR found tucked in a corner. The machine whirred and clicked, static filling the screen before the first blurry images appeared. At first, nothing seemed out of place. A hallway, a room with luxury furniture, chandeliers hanging high above, and the faint glimmer of sunlight through large windows. Then, in the corner of the frame, 2 figures appeared. One of them, unmistakably, was Andrew. A collective intake of breath filled the room. "You're seeing this, right?" the officer asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Heads nodded. The implications were immediate, visceral. This was not speculation anymore. These tapes were proof, hidden evidence, preserved, waiting. Somehow, the tapes had survived 2 decades. VHS is notoriously fragile. Magnetic fields, heat, humidity, all destroy the data over time. And yet, here they were intact. The preservation suggested intentionality. Someone had wanted these tapes to last, for reasons that no one in the room wanted to consider aloud. Questions started to pour in, fast and unrelenting. Who recorded them? Why were they hidden inside Royal Lodge and not in a palace archive? What else existed beyond these shelves, these boxes, these tapes? And most importantly, what did the content reveal? The team quickly realized they were looking at a surveillance system that had been almost invisible. It wasn't just cameras in obvious places. These recordings suggested hidden cameras, embedded in chandeliers, mirrors, even furniture. Professional grade, strategically placed. The kind of surveillance that requires planning, access, and someone trusted to maintain it. Some of the tapes had unusual codes. Yacht 2002, London 2004, Private Wing 2005. Names were sometimes replaced with initials. Locations were vaguely described, almost like a diary written in code. Whoever had cataloged these had an intimate knowledge of the royal household and its movements. One officer, reviewing the labels, said quietly, "These weren't made by an intruder. They were made by someone with access. Someone who knew when he would be home, who would visit, and when no one else would be watching." The thought alone was enough to make everyone pause. Then came the first tape marked simply, Study 2001. The senior investigator held it up. "We need to see what's on this one first," he said. They inserted it into the player. Static filled the screen at first. Shapes began to appear. The interior of a room, shadows moving. The camera angle was high, almost hidden, giving a voyeuristic perspective. For a moment, it looked benign, a party, laughter, casual conversation. But the room held subtle signs of hidden intentions, certain objects positioned deliberately, the movement of the camera itself suggesting someone was recording without the subject's knowledge. Then voices were heard, faint at first, but unmistakable. Laughter, names called, conversations that seemed innocuous until the context sank in. One voice stood out, low, smooth, controlled. "Everything is said," it said. "No one will see this." A chill ran down every spine in the room. The tapes weren't just documenting. They were controlling. Evidence, leverage, blackmail. It was all there in the subtle interactions, in the carefully framed shots, in the hidden perspectives. Another tape, labeled Island 2006, caused further unease. The officers recognized the setting from publicly available photos of Epstein's private retreats. The images on the screen, though blurry, matched descriptions from years of investigative reporting. Andrew was present. And again, The voice of a familiar figure, Jay, could be heard. The implications were staggering. These tapes weren't just a collection of old recordings. They were a meticulously preserved record of interactions, potentially incriminating, that had been hidden from the public for decades. The officers paused, absorbing the weight of what they had found. Each tape, each box, each cryptic note suggested a deliberate attempt to document, and possibly manipulate, the events within the royal household. Then they found something more troubling, a set of tapes without labels. Blank. Untitled. The senior investigator frowned. These could be even older, he said, or contain things the cataloger didn't want anyone to know about. He paused, then added, almost to himself, we're holding the past. 2 decades of secrets. And who knows what else is hidden in the shadows. The thought was terrifying. The investigation continued, with officers carefully cataloging, documenting, and securing every tape. It was slow work, exhausting work, but every box, every label, every note revealed the meticulous nature of the archive. Whoever had constructed this had planned for longevity, preservation, and control. And as night fell over Windsor, the team realized something even more unsettling. These tapes weren't just evidence of past interactions. They were evidence of a network, a surveillance system that had been in place for decades, hidden within the walls of a royal residence, recording events that the world was never meant to see. The magnitude of what they were uncovering began to settle in. Not just Andrew, not just Epstein. The room, the tapes, the entire operation suggested connections, influence, and secrecy on a scale few could comprehend. And as they secured the last of the day's findings, the senior investigator turned to the team. His face was pale. This isn't just a discovery. This is a warning. Because if these tapes exist, the consequences aren't just reputational. They're structural. They could reshape how we understand the events of the past 2 decades, who had power, who exercised influence, and who hid in plain sight while the world looked away. And yet, for all the revelations of that day, one truth remained clear. The tapes themselves were only the beginning. They were proof, yes, but they also raised deeper questions. Questions the royal household wasn't ready to answer. Questions the world wasn't ready to hear. And somewhere among those boxes, hidden behind years of dust and secrecy, lay the first tape that would make investigators freeze in disbelief. The one that would force them to confront a reality that no one had anticipated. A tape that shouldn't exist. And when it was finally played, the room would never be the same. The room fell silent as the first tape, labeled Guest Wing 2003, was placed carefully into the VCR. Even the seasoned officers, used to crime scenes, surveillance, and high-stakes investigations, felt a palpable tension in the air. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a simple search. This was something else entirely. A window into a world that had been meticulously hidden for over 20 years. The screen flickered to life with static, then cleared, revealing a grand hallway bathed in soft golden light. At first, it seemed innocuous, just the normal elegance of Royal Lodge. Thick carpets muffled footsteps, chandeliers hung high, and ornate furniture filled the rooms. But as the camera panned, subtle details emerged. Furniture moved ever so slightly, as if someone had recently been in the room. A glass glimmered on a side table, and then figures appeared. Andrew. There was no mistaking him. His posture, his gait, the way he moved with that casual but deliberate air of confidence. He was unmistakable. He was not alone. Another figure followed him into the frame, someone whose identity wasn't immediately clear. But then a name whispered among the officers, Jeffrey Epstein. The officers stiffened. Every instinct screamed that what they were watching was dangerous. Even the room's air felt heavier. The tape showed them moving through the house with ease, voices low, laughter light. But there was something calculated in every gesture, every glance. The camera captured moments most would consider trivial, a hand brushing against a surface, a casual sip of a drink, the subtle positioning of objects. But to those who understood surveillance, every detail mattered. Every angle, every perspective was a deliberate choice. This isn't casual footage, one officer muttered under his breath. This is surveillance designed to capture interactions, reactions, leverage. And then the voice came. Faint at first, almost drowned out by the ambient noise, but unmistakable. Smooth, controlled, deliberate. Everything is set. No one will see this. The words were like ice in the blood. For decades, the existence of Epstein's network had been whispered about in secret, yet no one had concrete proof connecting the elite to him beyond speculation and anecdotal evidence. And here it was, on tape, hidden in a royal estate, preserved with meticulous care. Andrew moved through the room, gesturing casually, his body language suggesting comfort and familiarity. Epstein followed, the two conversing quietly, leaning close. The camera's placement was strategic, almost predatory. It captured not just the conversation, but the way the figures positioned themselves, the subtle nods, the unspoken agreements. Officers glanced at each other nervously. The significance was clear. This wasn't a casual social call. This was documentation, recording, perhaps even manipulation. These tapes could serve as leverage, insurance, or even blackmail. The tape cut to another room, a private library. Again, the camera angle was unusual, set high as if hidden in a corner. Andrew and Epstein were now joined by a third figure. The camera remained steady, capturing every interaction, every movement. The conversations were muffled, almost coded, but the tone was unmistakable. Serious, calculated, heavy with intent. A female voice whispered to an officer watching over the shoulder of the team, "Look at how relaxed they are." That's the arrogance of someone who thinks no one is watching. Yet someone was. For decades, someone had been watching. The tape continued, shifting focus to a series of objects in the room. Glasses, papers, personal belongings. A subtle pattern emerged. Certain items were moved deliberately, almost ceremoniously. The officers realized these weren't mere props. Each was significant, part of a larger system of recording interactions and capturing subtle nuances. Every movement was being documented, cataloged, preserved. Then, something caught the eye of the senior officer. A shadow in the corner of the frame, almost imperceptible, moving with precision. A hidden camera. Its presence confirmed what they had suspected all along. The footage wasn't accidental. It was part of an orchestrated network of surveillance, placed strategically throughout the estate. The hidden room wasn't the beginning. It was just the storage site for what had been meticulously recorded over years. A junior officer, barely containing his shock, asked, "How many more tapes like this exist?" No one answered. The tape continued, and the officers began to piece together the subtle signals embedded in the footage. The positioning of objects, the gestures, the glances, all pointed to a broader pattern of observation and recording. This was intelligence gathering at its most invasive, hidden in plain sight within one of the most secure private residences of the British royal family. And then, the tape revealed something more alarming. A faint, almost imperceptible recording of a conversation that suggested planning, coordination, and knowledge of events far beyond the house. Names were mentioned, guests, visitors, even staff, but always in a way that suggested manipulation. Whoever had made these recordings had insights into movements, meetings, and interactions that no ordinary observer would have had. The officers sat back, absorbing the weight of what they were watching. They were not just looking at recordings. They were watching evidence of decades of surveillance, meticulously preserved, documenting events that had long been denied or hidden. Every moment, every interaction, every gesture captured on these tapes could be used to verify events, implicate participants, and reveal truths long suppressed. Then came the first shock. In the corner of one room, a figure appeared that no one expected. A woman. Her presence was subtle, almost fleeting, but unmistakable. She moved with confidence, interacting naturally with Andrew and Epstein, yet her inclusion raised questions. Who was she? Why was she there? What role did she play in this hidden narrative? The officers exchanged glances. This was no longer about Andrew or Epstein alone. The footage suggested a network of interactions, individuals, and connections that extended beyond what anyone had imagined. As the tape ended, the team sat in stunned silence. They had seen the first piece of undeniable evidence. Andrew in the company of Epstein, in a setting that was intimate, deliberate, and meticulously recorded. The implications were staggering. The senior officer finally broke the silence. This changes everything. And we haven't even started looking at the other tapes. A junior investigator shivered. How many more like this exist? No one answered. The first tape had proven the impossible: surveillance, hidden, preserved, and cataloged for decades, capturing moments that were never meant to be seen. And yet, it existed. It was real. And somewhere in the stack of boxes, hundreds more waited, each one potentially more incriminating, more revealing than the last. Because the first tape was only the beginning. The network of hidden cameras, the years of meticulous recording, and the carefully preserved archive in the secret room were just the tip of the iceberg. And the question everyone in that room would soon face was terrifying. If this tape exists, what else exists? What other secrets? What other moments? What other recordings had been preserved for 20 years, hidden in plain sight? And most importantly, who would see them next? Because when the next tape was played, everything would escalate. And no one could have predicted just how far-reaching the consequences would be. It wasn't just the tapes. That much became clear the moment the investigators started tracing the source of the recordings. The room itself, now bathed in the harsh glare of their flashlights, revealed secrets the estate had kept for decades. The walls were lined with grooves, almost imperceptible seams, hiding the paths of wires that led to every corner of the house. Mirrors had been hollowed out. Chandeliers had hollow chambers. Even the ornamental clocks lining the halls weren't just for show, they were watching. One of the senior investigators, a tall, sharp-eyed woman named Detective Albright, crouched by a floorboard that looked slightly uneven. She pressed lightly, and a soft click revealed another panel. Inside were bundles of thin, black cables, 20 years old, meticulously concealed, and perfectly preserved. "This isn't amateur work," she murmured, running a gloved hand over the wires. "This is professional-grade surveillance, built for longevity, for secrecy." Her words hung in the air. The younger officer, pale from exhaustion and awe, whispered, "Who would do this? And why hide it for decades?" Detective Albright didn't answer immediately. She had seen organized crime setups before. She had seen corporate espionage. But never had she encountered something so intimate, so personal. The wiring, the hidden cameras, the careful preservation, it all pointed to someone obsessed with observation. Not just recording events, controlling them, capturing them, preserving them. As they continued to examine the room, one officer traced a cable that led from the hidden library directly into the ceiling above the main hallway. Pulling carefully, he revealed a network of wires snaking along the rafters, each ending in small, hidden devices, miniature cameras, perfectly disguised within the ornate molding. Some were as tiny as a coin, others cleverly built into decorative carvings. "Look at this," he said, pointing to one nestled inside the pattern of a golden chandelier. "You could spend years here and never notice it." Albright crouched beside him. Her flashlight caught the faint reflection of a lens peeking through the chandelier. She tapped it lightly with her finger. The lens didn't move. It had been perfectly engineered to record without being detected. "This wasn't just about watching," she said slowly. "This was about control, about leverage. Whoever set this up wanted to know everything, and keep it hidden for as long as possible." The realization sent a shiver through the team. They had assumed the tapes represented the worst of the hidden secrets. But this network suggested a much larger scheme. Cameras placed in every key location. Wires hidden behind walls, beneath carpets, even in furniture. Someone had spent decades building a web of observation within this estate. And that wasn't the most chilling part. Detective Albright pulled down a panel above the fireplace. Inside was a small control box. Dials, switches, and a small reel mechanism hummed faintly, long since powered down but preserved in perfect condition. Handwritten notes scrawled on the inside cover of the box included dates, room labels, and even what appeared to be initials: CR 2005, BG 2003. The pattern was clear. Every interaction had been cataloged. Every guest, every staff member, every private meeting. Someone had planned this like a historian obsessed with every detail. Except this was a history of secrets, not stories. The younger officer leaned closer, eyes wide. "Do you realize what this means?" Albright's jaw tightened. "This isn't just a collection of recordings. This is a tool, a weapon." As they moved through the estate, tracing the network, more cameras came to light. A tiny pinhole above the staircase. A hidden device in the ceiling of the dining room. Even behind a decorative vase in the private study, They found a lens pointing directly at a chair that had been used for decades by the estate's master. "This level of surveillance," muttered another officer. "It's obsessive. It's invasive. It's insane." And then they began to realize the full scope. The cameras weren't random. They were positioned strategically. They captured entrances and exits, private conversations, and moments of vulnerability. This wasn't about curiosity. This was about cataloging power and influence. Whoever designed this system wanted proof, leverage, and knowledge of everything that happened inside the house. One tape they found in a drawer bore a warning: "Handle carefully. Contains sensitive interactions." 2004 to 2005. The handwriting was different from the others. Hurried, almost desperate. Albright noted it carefully in her log. The urgency in the handwriting hinted that even the person maintaining this network understood the danger of the material. Hours passed. More hidden panels, more concealed cameras. The investigation became a labyrinth. It was almost impossible to keep track of all the devices. Some were old, some had modern upgrades, suggesting that someone had maintained the network over the decades, updating technology to ensure that nothing was ever lost or compromised. The enormity of the system began to sink in. If the tapes had survived this long, if the wiring remained intact, then the archive wasn't just about one decade. It spanned decades. A record of events, relationships, and secrets meticulously preserved. And while the team cataloged what they could see, they all knew there was far more hidden beyond their reach. Albright finally spoke, her voice steady but heavy. "Think about it. For 20 years, someone knew everything happening in this house. Not just what guests did. Not just what the master did. Everything. And if these tapes ever leave this place, the consequences could be catastrophic." The room fell silent as everyone considered her words. The weight of what they were uncovering pressed down like a physical presence. These weren't just old recordings. They were a window into a world that had been carefully hidden from view, a network of power, secrecy, and surveillance that could rewrite history if exposed. Then came the discovery that made them all pause. A small compartment behind a false panel contained notebooks, handwritten instructions for the cameras, maintenance logs, and cryptic references to events, visitors, and locations. Someone had not only built the network, but documented it meticulously. And in one corner of a page, a note was scrawled: "To be used only when the time comes." For control. For leverage. Detective Albright stared at it. Control. Leverage. That's why all of this exists. Not for history. Not for posterity. For manipulation. And then a faint noise from the hall made everyone tense. The estate, once quiet, seemed alive. Shadows moved. The air seemed heavier. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. Whether it was the house settling or something else, they didn't know. But one thought consumed all of them. The network wasn't just a relic of the past. It might still be active. Because the hidden camera network was more than just technology. It was strategy. It was power. And whoever had orchestrated it had anticipated the day it would be discovered. The first tape had revealed the existence of secret surveillance. Now the network itself told a chilling story. Someone had spent decades watching, recording, and documenting, creating an archive of secrets that could control the fates of everyone who entered the estate. And as they turned to leave the room, the senior investigator paused, looking back at the maze of wires and cameras. "We've only scratched the surface," she said. "And what comes next will change everything." The deeper the investigators delved into the hidden camera network, the darker the picture became. The estate, once a symbol of prestige and tradition, now revealed itself as a meticulously orchestrated hub of secrets, surveillance, and leverage. The realization settled in. This wasn't about casual observation. It was about control. It was about power, and someone had been cultivating it for decades. Detective Albright led the team back into the secret room, her flashlight cutting through the thick dust that clung to every surface. Each shelf, each box, each tape was a potential revelation, a fragment of a much larger puzzle. And it didn't take long for the magnitude to hit them. On a small shelf tucked behind a false panel, they discovered a series of tapes labeled simply DC 2004, Island 2006, Private Wing 2005. The pattern was obvious. Locations, dates, initials. But the initials on these tapes were different. Not CR or BG as on previous notes, but a single chilling pair, J. Even the name alone made the air in the room feel heavier. J. The architect behind a network of darkness, manipulation, and influence that had entangled some of the most powerful people in the world. And here, tucked away in a hidden room of a private estate, were recordings that might connect the master of the house to this enigmatic figure. The senior officer, a veteran of high-stakes investigations, leaned over a tape and murmured, "This shouldn't exist. Not here. Not like this." And yet it did. The tape labeled Island 2006 was loaded into the player. Static at first, then the familiar flicker, revealing a room that felt like a private retreat. Dim lighting, soft music in the background, shadows moving across ornate walls. Two figures entered the frame. One, unmistakably the master of the estate, the man whose home they had just ransacked. The other, moving with a smooth, practiced confidence, was Jay. The officers froze. This was proof, evidence of connection, of interaction, of complicity. Even in the grainy image, the chemistry between the two figures was clear. They moved with ease, speaking softly, laughing lightly, gestures casual but deliberate. To the untrained eye, it might appear like a friendly meeting. But the positioning, the attention to detail, the subtle glances, they all spoke of calculated interaction. "This is surveillance designed for leverage," Detective Albright said quietly. "Not just recording events, but recording control, influence, secrets." The tape shifted, revealing private spaces within the estate. Hidden alcoves, private lounges, corridors no one had access to. The camera angles were perfect. Whoever had placed the cameras had anticipated movement, conversation, and even the subtle expressions of those within the room. Every gesture, every glance, every whispered word had been captured with precision. A young officer, still shaken from the previous discoveries, asked, "Why? Why preserve all of this for decades?" Albright didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on the screen. "Because control lasts only as long as the memory of it exists. Whoever did this, they were ensuring no one could deny it. No one could escape it. And the implications weren't just personal, they were strategic. The network, the tapes, the hidden recordings, they were all part of a larger plan. A system designed to track, manipulate, and maintain leverage over those within the estate. And the evidence suggested this had been going on for years, carefully maintained, updated, and preserved. The officers continued sifting through tapes. One labeled Private Wing, 2005, revealed a meeting in a lavish library. The master of the house was seated across from Jay, the camera perfectly capturing their gestures, their words, and even the objects between them. A glass, a notebook, a small decorative box. Every detail mattered. Every movement was recorded. Detective Albright leaned closer to the monitor. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "This isn't just a record. This is a blueprint. Whoever recorded this knew exactly how to capture influence, trust, and power, and how to use it." The team worked in silence for hours, cataloging and photographing each tape. As night fell over the estate, the scope of the network became frighteningly clear. The hidden cameras, the strategically placed recording devices, the careful preservation. It was a system built not just to observe, but to manipulate and control. And it wasn't just about the estate. The tapes contained references to trips, meetings, and interactions in distant locations. Names, initials, and coded notes hinted at connections far beyond the walls of the house. Whoever maintained this network had eyes everywhere and had documented everything meticulously. Then came a discovery that chilled the entire team. Behind a false panel in the corner of the room, they found notebooks filled with handwritten logs. Dates, locations, visitor names, and subtle annotations suggested these weren't casual records, they were instructions. Maintenance logs for the network, reminders of which cameras to check, which tapes to copy, which visitors to watch most closely. Albright flipped through one notebook. One entry read, DC, 2004. Meeting observed. No disturbances. Retain for leverage. Follow-up required. Another page, Island, 2006. Interaction successful. Maintain discretion. Preserve tapes for future use. The language was chilling. These weren't just records, they were an operational manual. A roadmap for influence, secrecy, and manipulation. And the handwriting suggested urgency, even obsession. Whoever maintained this system understood the power they wielded. A junior officer spoke, voice trembling. So all of this, it's not just old surveillance. It's a network designed to control, to manipulate, to preserve power over decades. Albright nodded. Exactly. And if these tapes exist, then others probably exist too. Hidden in other locations, maintained by others who understood the system. The room fell silent as the implications settled in. The tapes, the network, the meticulous documentation, they weren't relics. They were evidence of a system built to endure. And the question hung heavy in the air. How far did it go? How many lives, how many decisions, how many reputations had been shaped or destroyed by this hidden network? And then, a small detail caught Albright's eye. One of the tapes, partially hidden beneath the rest, had no label at all, just a faint scratch along the edge. She picked it up carefully. The tape felt heavier than the others, almost as if it contained something more significant. She held it up to the light. This one is different, she whispered. The team exchanged nervous glances. They knew, in their bones, that whatever was on that tape would change everything. The network had revealed its existence. The evidence of influence and control had been uncovered. But this unmarked tape, this could be the proof that no one had dared imagine. And as the night deepened, the estate seemed to hold its breath.